Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Hi Steve, how are you?
I am beyond wonderful. Thanks for having me.
How You're very welcome. Excited to have you finally. It's about time. I was slacking on that one. So, how is everything in Point Pleasant? Did you have any interesting visitors yesterday at the museum?
Um, no, it was pretty standard. A lot of people were showing up. They, you know, people come from all over the world really to see the Mothman statue and to visit the museum. And every once in a while, I get somebody from Michigan, my former home. It's always fun to find out where they're from. And yeah, it was a good day. And uh, again, you get to speak to a lot of people, and we get into great conversations. And of course, I tell them and show and uh, tell them where everything is the Bridge Memorial, the museum, some of the other sculptures by Bob Roach, the man that did the Mothman statue. So, and also I tell them how they can find the infamous TNT area where the Mothman was originally seen back in the '60s.
Now, what would you say people are most interested in when they come?
They a lot of them ask about if it's been seen again, and Mothman. His heyday was pretty much in the middle '60s. Jeff Wamsley, the guy who created the museum, he's gotten reports over the decades of every once in a while somebody seeing something. Um, I had Ron Lanham of Wild and Weird West Virginia on my show recently, and he saw something. He's not saying it was the Mothman, but it was some kind of a winged creature. And so it's very difficult to say that people are seeing exactly the same thing. We really don't know what this was. And the first mention of John Keel, Keel wasn't sure. I mean, he believed that they were coming from the same source, the same kind of energy or whatever, but they might actually manifest a little bit differently. So whatever people are seeing might actually originate from the same source, but they might manifest a little bit differently.
So, is that what you think Keel would think about it if he were here today?
Yes, yeah. He was frank. He said he did not know what the Mothman was. He actually he used the term ultra terrestrial to kind of steer people away from strictly an extraterrestrial explanation. He thought these things were probably some kind of a natural condition of the planet we just didn't understand. And he borrowed that term from his friend and colleague, Ivan Sanderson. And but interesting, if you read his some of his articles, he used the term ultra terrestrial interchangeably sometimes with elemental. And actually, the more I think about it, elemental is not a bad description for the Mothman because while people were reporting physically the same thing, not exclusively, some people just saw something like a large bird. But most people were talking about something kind of humanoid, 6 to 7 feet tall, 10-foot wingspan, red glowing eyes. But the behavior was just bizarre. It's hard to fit it into like a flesh and blood category or even strictly an apparition. Although people did see it manifest in their bedrooms. Some people saw it take off and not flap its wings, just go up straight up like a helicopter. And a lot of people that experienced it had an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena when they got home. So it presented a paradox in so many different ways. And I guess I'm comfortable with saying, I'm not sure what an elemental is, but yeah, I see Vincent is talking about trickster entities, and the trickster idea does kind of fit the whole spectrum of the Mothman prophecies.
Yeah, I had a guest fairly recently, Chad Saunders. One of the things we talked about was like the Native American beliefs about elementals. It really sounds no different from ultra terrestrials to me. Just like an energy that's always been here is connected to the planet. Same kind of concept. Um, I don't know if they're always tricksters, but a lot of them certainly are.
Well, it seems that's one thing that seems to mirror human consciousness. Many years ago, I had the TV on. This is like 79 or 80, and the old Phil Donahue show was on. And this is way back when, before his hair turned white, and he would use silly gimmicks to get ratings. But he had a parapsychologist on. And I was trying to search on the internet to find out who it was. I don't know. A tall gentleman, dark hair, sounded like he might have been from New York, the New York area. But he was fascinating. And he said he was talking about automatic writing. Now, while he believed some contact with the beyond was legitimate, he said, if you're going to practice automatic writing, you need to be very alert, because it will start out. It's actually, he said, most of it is coming from your own subconscious. And he said it starts out being sort of friendly, and then it gets more intimate. And sometimes it gets very nasty and damaging, like the trickster aspect. And I thought, wow, what does that sound like? Now, I had read the Mothman Prophecies. That sounded very similar to what some of John Keel's silent contactees were experiencing. Those that haven't read the book, Keel was in contact with, during the year of the Garuda, he was in contact with many individuals that just absolutely believed that they were receiving messages from other intelligences. And I think most of this was in the form of channeling and so forth. But and they had absolutely no interest in publicity. They firmly believed this was going on, and he called them the silent contactees. Well, something similar happened with them sometimes. They would get predictions, and sometimes they would come true. And then, but sometimes they would be sent on pointless quests. One Keel talked about where they were supposedly trying to find a crucifix in Brooklyn, of all places, that had some kind of magical properties. And then there's the story of the University of Michigan professor that was in contact with a woman who was channeling, and she was getting messages. And the messages there were a whole series of predictions that came true. And then came the big one. December 21st, I forget what year it was, but the Space Brothers were going to come down, and the world was going to end. But the believers, the true believers, were going to be taken away in a flying saucer. And of course, the flying saucer didn't show up, and his tenure evaporated. So, because he made a big splash about it. So it's just that same kind of pattern that it seems like it is somehow tied in with Carl Jung's trickster archetype, and which again suggests that perhaps we're not dealing with some other intelligence, but maybe it's something within us, within human consciousness that does that. And I don't know why. It's like, did you ever see the film Forbidden Planet?
A long time ago, yes.
The MacGuffin was that there was this advanced civilization, and they had figured out how to turn thoughts into things. They could actually manifest ideas, thoughts. And they ended up becoming extinct. And it turned out that they didn't they forgot about monsters from the id. That's ID. That's Freud. The dark part of human consciousness. Those monsters were manifested and wiped them out. So it's almost like there is this dark part of human consciousness, or this trickster part. I don't know, but it's very hard to pin down and very elusive.
There is definitely a lot of human consciousness and the way brains work that we don't understand. When I did ketamine therapy last summer, the first time I went to get an infusion, my friend came with me and was writing down all of the stuff I was saying.
Yes.
And one of the things, like I was saying things like I was sad that cats don't understand that you're helping them when you take them to the vet and that kind of thing. But then I was also I was also talking about these orchids that they look like female beetles so that male beetles will try to mate with them and pollinate them. And when my friend was telling me that, like, that wasn't a thing that I knew. I'm like, did I just make that up? Well, we looked it up and those are real orchids. Like, I must
Wow.
have heard it at some point and it was like in the back of my mind and I didn't
Right.
realize that I knew it. So like it makes sense to me that, things can be coming from yourself, your own consciousness without you knowing, in the automatic writing. And, just like, I think we've both had issues where we've ordered things in the middle of the night online and then forgot about it until it came.
Yeah. It's a good thing I'm not normally a heavy drinker because God only knows what Amazon would deliver to my porch.
Yeah, I will never ever try that. What is it called? That sleeping pill that makes people do crazy things. I'm never gonna. That's not for me. I have enough problems. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about today was Men in Black.
Ah, yes.
I know everyone talks about Mothman. It's Mothman, Mothman, Mothman. Obviously, I'm a fan of Mothman, but Men in Black are interesting to me. I had a kind of a preconceived notion about what I thought they were before I read the Mothman prophecies. I thought it was just, government agents being weird or just maybe some weirdos. And I think there were some weirdos that
Yeah,
played in
definitely.
there. Yeah. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, Keel would use the term as a generic term. It didn't necessarily mean that they were just men dressed up in black suits with black fedoras. Um, uh, there was he reported on a I guess you'd call it a memo that the Air Force put out once, because apparently there were a lot of people were being visited by people that claimed they were Air Force. They were dressed in Air Force uniforms. This goes back to the 60s. And they were confiscating photographs and telling people not to talk about their experience. And the Air Force wanted to nail one of these guys because they were definitely not legitimate. When Keel was one thing in the Mothman prophecies, he talks about how he was talking with Mary Hyre. Mary Hyre was the reporter that he was a friend and colleague with, and she wrote the column "Where the Waters Mingle," and she talked about Men in Black and Mothman and UFOs. And one of them said, "Is there a convention in town or something like that?" Because they're seeing all these guys in black suits and skinny ties, close cropped hair. And Keel tried to engage one in the conversation, but these whoever these people were, they had no personality. So it was. I think that in this particular case, the government was kind of interested in what was going on in Point Pleasant. All the reports. Now, of course, we get the really really strange encounters. Mary Hyre had some. And like you said, in some cases, it's probably, as you well know, this area of interest that we're in does attract some oddballs, some people that are a bit off. So it's not impossible that some just really creepy guys show up and act in strange ways, and they might be misinterpreted as the dastardly Men in Black. But there have been some really bizarre reports. There was the one in Dr. Hopkins in Maine in the 70s, where he was a colleague of Dr. Berthold Schwartz, who wrote a great book called UFO Dynamics, and he investigated. I think it was the Stevenson or the Stevenson case. Two men had missing time. And he got a call one time. He's home alone. His wife and his son are out, and somebody called from. He said he was from some kind of group or organization and wanted to go over those files with him. And he said sure. And then, like just moments later, the guy's there at the door, and he lets this guy in, and he's hairless. He says he's it's like he has. It's kind of has lipstick on because it apparently he doesn't have much of any kind of pigmentation there on his lips, and this really bizarre conversation goes on, and this guy does some kind of a parlor trick with a couple of coins and makes them disappear. And then he says to Hopkins, he says, "Do you know what happened to Barney Hill?" Now, Betty and Barney Hill, the classic abduction case. And he said, "Well, I think he had a heart attack. And actually, he did have a stroke." But the guy said, "No, his heart disappeared in the same way that these coins did." And it was like very sinister, very bizarre. And the guy leaves. Now, later on, one of I think a nephew said that they thought, some of the family members thought he might have just made this up. Well, you can decide for yourself, because you can go to the Faded Discs Archive, which is a great resource. If you click on Wendy Connors in that, and then under Wendy Connors, you've got all kinds of close encounters of the third kind, fourth kind, a high strangeness section, classic contactee stuff. But there's a half-hour interview with Dr. Hopkins, and he sounds credible to me. And Dr. Bertold Schwartz thought Hopkins got completely out of the UFO thing afterwards. So and Schwartz thought he was credible. Let me give you one other weird example. Jenny Randalls wrote a great book called The Truth Behind the Men in Black, and she's a great British researcher. There was a young woman that had a UFO sighting. I believe she reported it, but a couple men showed up that seemingly from the government. And the one guy was calling the other guy the commander. Her parents couldn't understand why they just allowed them in without any kind of question. And they were interrogating. One of them was interrogating her, and she was very uncomfortable. And the line of questions were not terribly revealing. Jenny Randall's got the idea, well, this is really weird. Why don't we put her under regressive hypnosis to see if we can find anything out about this? And it turned out that, at least in this woman's mind, the other person, in between questions from the verbal questions, she was getting telepathic questions from this other guy, and she was just distraught. These questions were coming at her verbally and mentally. So there are some just truly bizarre cases, and then there's the ones where some of them seem to manifest. Linda Scarberry, there was a sort of a man in black type that manifested in her house, and so again, it's one of these things that's like a quagmire. You don't know what to believe, what to disbelieve. And I'm sure some of it is people are having hallucinations. Actually, Keel thought that some of the Men in Black encounters were illusory, not hallucinations per se, but he thought that some kind of an outside influence or whatever was causing these experiences. And you can go back to the 1600s with Anne Jeffreys. She was the one that claimed to have all these incredible experiences with the little people, with the elementals, but she never left her room. Orfeo Angelucci, one of the classic contactees of yesteryear, a lot of his claims were kind of dubious, I think, but he went into a trance or something for about a week. They thought he was going to die. And when he came out of it, he had these great stories about the Space Brothers. So, again, it brings us back to in a lot of cases, the human consciousness angle.
It reminds me of Richard Shaver as well.
Oh, yes. Shaver is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I have a book on him in his rock paintings on my side table right now.
Oh, excellent. Do you have, I think you did read the War Over Lemuria by Richard Toronto.
Yeah, I read that one, and then I just picked up another book on our good friend Dean Bertram's recommendation about the rock painting specifically.
Right. Yeah, he was. He seemed to be tapped into a source of information. Sort of like channeling, I guess. And just because he was, this was some kind of an outside source, it didn't mean it was, objectively true. But still, I don't think he was. I don't think he was just crazy. Although some of his experiences, delusions, if you will, paralleled a guy named James Tilly Matthews, who was a Welsh tea merchant in the 1700s. And he believed that he called them the heirloom gang. They weren't the Darrow. They weren't these evil beings underneath the earth that Shaver talked about, but they were they was some kind of a crazy device buried in the basement of the House of Commons, run by pneumatics, air operated. And he even talked about rays, them sending rays out to confuse him, to kind of discombobulate him. So there that it was very very similar, the parallel to Shaver, but still there was something, just something very very kind of unique about Shaver's experience, and it all goes back to that. Kind of the basic, all the heroes of old. Odysseus, he went to Hades, the land underneath. Aeneas went to the underworld. It's kind of this continuing folklore or myth about the things underneath the earth and our interactions with them.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if me mentioning his name summoned Dean, or if just us talking about Richard Shaver did.
Hi, Dean.
Before we get too off topic, I have another Men in Black question for you.
Okay.
Hasn't there been historical Men in Black sightings, like men in black showing up in horse-drawn carriages and things like that? Have you heard those?
Yes. Demonolatry by, is it Nicholas Flamel? Oh, I'm not sure. But this guy was a kind of a witch hunter, and probably not a very nice guy. But but some of the witches were supposedly were consorting with the devil, and some of the descriptions in this book of the devil, they're dressed in black, they wear hats, they might show up on a black horse instead of a black Cadillac. They didn't have vocal cords, so when they spoke, the voice was kind of projected outside of them, which is very similar to some UFO contacts. Sometimes people describe a kind of a voice box or whatever on their chest, but other times they say that the voice came from somewhere. It wasn't telepathy. The fingers of these demons with the devil were twisted and elongated, very much like some of the modern day Men in Black experiences, and even some of the UFO reports of the CE3s of the little beings. So, yeah, it's kind of an event or something that has been with us forever. And the thing is that I can't remember the guy's name for sure, but anyway, I guess some of the witches were involved in practices that were a bit unsavory. But on the other hand, some of them were probably doing things like divination and working with crystals, stuff you'd see on Oprah, but they were still being persecuted for it,
Yeah, for sure. So Keel, I believe he termed the coin window area.
Yes.
But did he have a favorite theory on what makes the window areas? Where do they come from? Do they randomly pop up, or did he not? know at all.
Not that I know of, although he said that these areas seem to have been around for a long time, that other things have manifested in even hundreds of years before in those areas. I guess one example. Well, of course, if you look at the modern day folklore, not modern day folklore, but modern day UFO experiences and elements of folklore as described in Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia. Some of the areas where people claim to see landings and humanoids and so forth, were areas where people claim to have encounters with the fairies, with the little people. There's a great book called the Dovid Enigma by Randall Pugh and F.W. Holliday, and a lot of it centers around the Coombs family. They were living in a trailer near the shoreline. This is southwest Wales, and for a time, they would look out at 10 p.m. and through the window, only through the window, and they would see a apparition of the Virgin Mary form, all dressed in white with a rosary. And then eventually she would morph into an image of Jesus. This happened, hundreds of people saw this over a period of time. Well, that same family, when they were managing the Ripperston farm, they were kind of like one of the focal points of all kinds of bizarre phenomena. They weren't the only ones that experienced it, but there were these 7-foot-tall humanoids dressed in silver suits. There were even little short guys that looked like leprechauns almost, associated with the same kind of egg-shaped craft, orbs of light and so forth. So this particular area had both what some might think are some kind of a religious miracle or apparition, or maybe it's just something that appears that way. But they had a whole series of bizarre incidents, and they also found out that this particular area of Wales, these guys knew a lot about the folklore in the area, and there were just a lot of parallels between elements and stories of folklore and the modern day experiences that were going on there in the 70s, late 70s. One was some of the people that had a close proximity with these 7-foot-tall beings contracted some kind of a dermatological condition, and there was something was called elf disease or elf burn, which was also some kind of a dermatological condition. Can't prove it's the same thing. There was I don't know. Are you familiar? Have you read The Hunt for the Skinwalker Ranch, the original book?
No.
There's an incident in there. The Shermans were high-end cattle ranchers, and they had these black Angus bulls, about 4 of them in a pen. And this is in the midst of all, they were seeing all kinds of bizarre craft, strange creatures. This is when the NIDS team, the National Institute for Discovery Science, was there under Bigelow, but they weren't a constant presence. They weren't there 24/7. Well, they were doing something, repairing a fence on one part of the property. And when they're driving back, Gwen Sherman says, I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls because they've had cattle mutilations and so forth. Well, of course, they get there. The pen is all closed up. There's no footprints, and the bulls are gone. And then they find them in there's this old white trailer that they never used that was on the property. They're all kind of jammed in there. They're alive, but they're in kind of a stupor. Sherman bangs on the door. They wake up. They kick the place apart, and it takes them hours to corral them. Back to Wales, the Coombs family, they were had a dairy farm, and one night they have 100 cattle penned up, and they even have the bolt is strapped so they don't accidentally move the bolt apart so they can get out. And the next morning they're gone. Where are they? A half mile away at the Broadmoor farm, somehow, and just wandering around. And the thing is, some people thought, well, somebody played a joke on them, right? Well, they would have had to herd 100 cattle past the window where they sleep, They would have had to guide them over there because you have to make a 90-degree angle turn to get to the Broadmoor farm. And, cattle don't usually think that clearly. So a few days later, Billy Coons takes 16 of them, puts them in a pen, turns around, goes into the barn, turns the milking machines on. He comes out, and they're gone. And they're at the Broadmoor farm again. So you get this bizarre displacement of cattle. Even there's another example. I interviewed Alan Godfrey, Todd Morden, England. He was a police officer in 1980. And he got a call that these cattle has shown up in this gated area. They don't know how they got in there. And he thought it was a joke at first. So he went and talked to the woman that reported it. She said, hey, look, I might be old, but I'm not crazy. And sure enough, there's these cattle there. So and on the way back to the precinct, he has a classic UFO sighting. He even sketches it on a pad. And when he finally gets back, he realizes that he's got about a half hour of missing time. So, it's just all weaving together. And the last part of this is when he finally, he makes an appointment to undergo regressive hypnosis. And again, they had no explanation as to how the cattle got there. But he doesn't remember how he got aboard the craft. But once he's there, there's some tall guy dressed in white, calls himself Yosef, and he's telling him about, this and that about the craft. And there's these little short guys there that might be grays, I don't know. But Alan said that they were so hideous looking, he couldn't look at them. So at one point, under hypnosis, he says, he's describing what he's seeing, and then he says, there's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous. A large black dog he's seeing in this spacecraft, and Jenny Randalls, who reported on it, couldn't help but see the connection possibly with the black shuck, the black spectral dog that haunts the moors and the ruins in England. So it's just these things are just inexplicable. Why does it happen? And also, when Q and Holiday, they were looking through a book of Norwegian folklore, and there was a story of the milkmaid who she put her cow in the pen, and she goes to get her milk bucket, and the cow's gone, and this keeps happening. And eventually, one of the little people comes to her and says, "You can't put your cow there. It's spoiling our food." And so Pew and Holiday, they speculate that perhaps the elementals or whatever derive their food or energy from ley lines or some kind of earth energy that are not seen. And they devote a chapter to that, but they're not dogmatic about it. But I can't help but think that almost the moment that Gwen Sherman said, "I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls," something did. It's like the trickster reared his ugly head again and said, "Guess what?"
Yep, for sure. And what you're describing of like these entities feeding off of ley lines and energy reminds me of something Andy Mercer said about the theory that ley lines were created from, people traveling these certain paths for so long and kind of leaving their energy behind. And I think that kind of connects with what you said earlier about like maybe ultra terrestrials are part of human consciousness. Like we're kind of almost creating these things.
But I think we're sort of co-creating it. It's like they're Keel talked a lot about paranormal mimicry and the reflective factor. So, and you and I have talked before about how if you go way back in time, the strange meandering lights were fairy lights. They might have been I mean, it's hard to believe that people actually thought that in some cases they were witches flying around on their brooms carrying their lanterns. I hope that's not true. That would really freak me out. And of course the airships, the majestic airships that we're seeing in different waves, including the late 1800s, and then we had the mysterious the ghost planes up in Sweden. Sometimes people, they would just, whether it was the airship or whatever, they would just see the light and they would assume there was a craft or something with it. But they were seeing these things in the 30s in Sweden, way up past the Arctic Circle. These were planes with I don't know how many engines on them, just huge, and they would shine these giant spotlights down on these little towns and fly over. And where were they coming from? What did they have? It almost makes me wonder if we have some of the hollow Earth beliefs, if they had some kind of a base from the hollow Earth, where these things would come down. It's just bizarre. And then, of course, we had the Foo Fighters and then the more classic sort of science fiction flying saucer type. And even more recently, was it Ted Phillips? Ted Phillips was a friend and colleague of Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And he investigated literally thousands of trace landing cases. And he was the one that people told him about this place he called Marley Woods. It's in the southeast, I think, Missouri. And he said that he noticed that while you still get the classic flying saucer and the cigar-shaped ships, and cigar-shaped ships. Good thing I'm not drinking. And the black triangles and so forth. He said a lot of them now were more like the lights, the blobs of light that would separate and come together again. So there seems to be some kind of a I don't know if you call it evolution or just change. Although you still get everything, that the whole smorgasbord of different types of things flying in the sky.
Yeah, I was looking into a UFO sighting flap in the 1600s in New England. Pilgrims were seeing strange lights in the sky, and I was talking to a local historian about it, and he said the same phenomena was reported in Germany at the same time period as the Pilgrim UFO sightings. It just seems it's odd. The same things were happening. I don't think they were texting each other or anything.
No, I don't think so either.
But I see Horace Smith just joined. Horace, it was your co-author that was telling me about that, actually. Eddie Guimont was the person I was talking to that was telling me about the UFO Germany 1600 sightings. The historical ones, not that, ones today aren't always credible, but there's so much just going on in the sky today. You have all the Starlink satellites all the time. And, it's to the point where I don't think people look at the sky much anymore. And if they do, I think there's, you have the two different kinds of people. You have the people that think the satellite is a UFO. And then you have people that might think a UFO is a satellite and not, think about it twice. I think me and you would probably be the second category of people there.
the smartest people there, obviously, right?
There's probably a good compromise somewhere. But, I've heard you talk about reading the Mothman prophecies, before the movie came out, before it was really popular. But how did you originally find out about Keel?
He was, I guess, probably through the UFO magazines at the time. And I would have read a lot of his articles. One of the earliest books I read was Strange Creatures from Time and Space, which is also called The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, and that's where he first talks about window areas. I actually saw him on television once. I inherited my grandparents gave me their. It was an old black and white TV, but it had UHF stations on it. I don't know if you kids know what UHF was, but you need to Google it. And so there was a local station there, Channel 50, and they would have these syndicated shows from New York. Cool stuff, man. They had the Alan Burke show had Ivan Sanderson on one time talking about the Bermuda Triangle, I think. And John Keel was there with him. He was in the audience, and he was one of the ones that came up to the speaker to ask questions and so forth. So I thought that was pretty cool. A friend of mine met a lot of these people when he went to the 1967 Congress of Scientific Ufologists at the Commodore Hotel in New York City. I was supposed to go, but I guess my parents decided that it was his mom was taking. We were in junior high, so his mom was going to take me with him, but they decided I wasn't going to go wandering around New York, I guess. So I had to live vicariously through Kevin. But he told me this great story about Keel. I think it was the next year. He made a friend of a guy named Mark, and they got a hold of John Keel's address, his apartment, and he said they actually had the stones to go knock on his door cold, and they did. And he let them in. He was very gracious. They spoke for about an hour to an hour and a half. He was in his PJs. They were all sitting cross-legged on the floor. Keel was surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of newspaper clippings. That was probably he was commissioned to write a definitive article on UFOs for Playboy, so that might have been what that was for. But eventually, those clippings would have gone into his research for Operation Trojan Horse, which is kind of his grand opus. And so that was I just wish I'd been there. And then some friends of mine, John and Jim Frick, that portray the Men in Black by day at the Mothman Festival, fly the Mothman by night on the TNT hayride. They were there in 2003 when they unveiled the Mothman statue, and Keel was there in his white suit. It was covered on CBS Sunday Morning. Very cool. And so they took him to lunch, and they went to the place that used to be called Tiny's, which is now Village Pizza. It was a classic UFO or Mothman sighting there. And he told them all kinds of stories about, he used to write for Merv Griffin. Merv Griffin was a talk show host. He used to write ad libs for Merv Griffin. He wrote some episodes of Lost in Space under a pseudonym. So there's one show where there's a werewolf in Lost in Space named Keel. So that might be a dead giveaway of one of the ones he wrote. But he's just such a fascinating guy. There, you can still find some of his lectures on YouTube. And when he talks about his time in the military, he was part of the Armed Forces Entertainment Network. And if you another great book that he's written was called Jadoo, which is about his service, but also his wanderings through Egypt and Tibet and so forth after the military. So fascinating stuff.
So Dr. Dean is in the comments. He's brought up Maury Island a couple of times.
Oh, yes. Maury Island, in my humble estimation, was a hoax. Let's see, help me out here, Dean. Who's the guy that was behind Maury Island? His name just fell out of my head. But anyway, it'll come to me.
Dahl?
What's that?
Dahl?
No, it's Harold Dahl, but the other guy that actually perpetrated the hoax.
I don't know how you remember as many names as you do, Steve. So.
I could probably just make him Fred Chrisman. Thank you, Dean. Okay. During the Shaver mystery, there were a lot of very entertaining letters that came into the offices. And one of them was originally anonymous. And this guy, it turned out to be Fred Chrisman. And he said he and his buddy were shot down near Burma. And we went into a cave, and they were attacked by these creatures. And his buddy was zapped by some kind of like a heat ray or whatever, and it made a hole in his arm. And he's telling Ray Palmer, who was the publisher of Amazing Stories and who promoted the Shaver Mystery, to but please, please end this. Don't pursue this anymore. And so then later on, he writes other letters, and you find out it's Fred Chrisman. And then sometime later, Fred Chrisman claims about there's this incident, and this is right around the time of Roswell. There's off Puget Sound, I think. There were 5 donut-shaped objects that were overhead. One looked like it was having trouble, and some slag or whatever fell down on Herod Dahl's boat, and his son was injured, and the dog was killed supposedly. And but it's a long story, but it looks like Chrisman just made it all up. I mean, he even rented. It was bizarre because Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold was the had that sighting, classic sighting in 1947, where the term flying saucer was coined. Ray Palmer asked him to fly out there. He would pay him to check this out, to investigate. So he did. And Kenneth Arnold is starting to think that this is all nonsense. He goes to see the boat that's supposed to have happened to. It didn't even look seaworthy. You never saw the kid or whatever. It just looked like it was a big hoax. And Fred Chrisman apparently even rented a house and had a fake secretary there for show for Kenneth Arnold. It's just mind-numbingly. I mean, why? But the tragedy was that some of the slag that they collected, supposedly coming from the UFO, it was probably just nothing, just something mundane. Some of it was some Air Force officers got involved with it, and they took off with it, and their plane crashed. I mean, this would not have happened if they didn't corral these guys into this stupid hoax. And the upshot of it is that Jerome Clark, in one of his books, talks about a reporter who, at the time, he's on the back porch talking to Harold Dahl, and he wants to know about what's going on. And blasting out of the back door is Harold Dahl's wife with a butcher knife. And the reporter thinks, oh, this is it. I'm done. But she goes up to her husband, grabs him by his collar, and says, stop embarrassing me with your lies. and so he admitted it was a hoax perpetrated by Fred Chrisman. It's a fascinating story. And it even there's like a supposed Man in Black encounter involved with it. But it just shows you how, some absolute nonsense can have reverberation. I mean, there's still people out there. You watch something like Ancient Aliens sometimes, or some of them, they'll refer to that as a real incident. And it's, listen to your old pal Steve here. It's utter crap. It's just crap.
Yep. Do you think his wife was a redhead, or do we know?
Well, she had the what do I want to say? The consciousness of a redhead, where she wouldn't put up with the nonsense.
Definitely had the ginger gene, at least. If she didn't technically have red hair. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I know you had mentioned that Keel did not like Palmer and the Shaver Mystery at all. Do you think it has to do with, the magazines kind of perpetuating these hoaxes a little bit? Because, if it wasn't for Palmer, we might not know about Maury Island, and you wouldn't have Ancient Aliens still saying it was a true story.
My impression is that, Richard Toronto scored a great interview with Keel when he wasn't doing many interviews. And it was in his publication called Shavertron. Toronto did this off and on for several years, kind of a fanzine for the Shaver Mystery. And my impression is, now, Keel would have been, in his teens when Shaver Mystery started. I think I think the shaver stuff just freaked him out. I think when he was reading it initially, and so I think I think that's what triggered him. But he gave a really interesting interview with Toronto, and then that interview actually is where he reveals that I did not create the term ultra terrestrial. I borrowed it from Sanderson. There's just a lot of good information there. So, but yeah, Keel didn't have a lot of patience for the hoaxers.
I can understand that. You have seen how angry I get when someone calls a Pukwudgie a Nephilim.
Yes. Even
Yeah.
I get mad now.
It's very triggering for all of us now. I'm glad that I've shared my enragement with the rest of the world now, and everyone gets in on it with me. But Keel also, the frustrating thing about Keel to me is he mentions little people all the time, but never gets into it a lot. Like, he'll just kind of give you, like, a passing mention of little people. Like, even in the Mothman prophecies, he talks about, they're in the bank of the river, a red orb of light is spotted, and then there's little people spotted along the side of the river. And, I think it was Eighth Tower, he, like, briefly mentioned little people again. Have you ever heard him go into more detail about little people that you can remember?
Not really. The only thing I can think of is that sometimes the modern day ufonauts that claim they're from wherever, he said that sometimes they use the same names as fairy names, which is interesting. But no, not too much. I think he was very much on the same wavelength with Jacques Vallée as far as the connections, the missing time in both UFO experiences and the encounters with the little people. There is an interesting parallel. This is kind of on the same subject. We remember the Betty and Barney Hill case, and they during the incident, Betty Hill sees this book, and it's got photographs in it and pictures and so forth. And she asked the leader if she can take this book. She thought, well, if this will be my proof, even if nobody believes me, I'll know this is real. And of course, we have all these traditions in folklore. There was the one about the little boy that meets up with some of the fairies, and they're tossing a ball back and forth. And it looks like it's made out of gold or something like that. And of course, there's a time distortion where he thinks he's just there for a short time and he's gone all day. But when he wants to leave, he tries to take this golden ball with him. And of course, they catch him at the last minute. He doesn't get to take it. And we have all kinds of stories like this where they try to get the treasure or whatever out of fairyland, and it turns into a snake or a spider, which you wouldn't mind if that happened. But they're always thwarted. So she's about to leave. She and Barney were about to leave the craft. And at the last minute, the leader says, "I'm sorry, the others object. You can't have the book." And it's just like a repeat of the old fairy motif. You can't, you just can't get those treasures out of fairyland or across the threshold of a spaceship. So we have these patterns, these connections that always keep showing up.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of any abductees having eaten something during their abduction?
Yes. A lot. Sometimes they're given something to drink, like food from fairyland,
Right.
And you're supposed to be very careful about doing that because you may never get out. But yeah, actually, Keel talks a lot about that. I don't know if I can remember too many specific instances, but and of course, Joe Symington, he got those awful tasting pancakes, and they might have been better with butter and syrup. I don't know, but they were pretty awful.
It was like your IHOP in New Hampshire experience, or worse, you think?
Well, the IHOP, the food was delicious. The bill was not.
Yeah, that's the bad part of New England, unfortunately. Yeah. For anyone that doesn't know the pancake story, do you want to tell that one real quick?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Joe Symington. This is 1961 April, near Eagle River, Wisconsin. He is a plumber by trade, chicken farmer by day, and he's finishing up his late breakfast dishes. And he hears this noise he describes as knobby tires on a wet pavement. And he looks outside and he sees a classic flying saucer. I mean, like two bowls, an inverted bowl. And the door is open. He goes outside. He can see there's people in there. Nothing looks terribly threatening. And so he approaches them, and they're wearing coveralls and knit caps. They're about 5 feet tall, and one of them is looks like he's cooking something on a flameless grill. Okay, so you got to just think here. This is supposedly some kind of a spacecraft or a space pod or something like that, and they're taking up all this space for cooking. I mean, don't they have freeze-dried food on Jupiter? I mean, come on. What about Tang, like the astronauts drank? So, and this guy hands Joe a bowl that looks like it's made out of the same chrome material as the saucer, and indicates through gestures he wants water. No telepathy, no speech. So he goes, brings him water. He says he's having a little trouble meeting this guy at eye contact. And so he gives them the water, and they give him in return 3 or 4 of these pancakes. Sometimes they call them cookies or whatever, and in return. And then they take off. I mean, the whole incident is very short. And now later on, he actually reports this. The Air Force gets involved. Dr. Jalen Hynek gets involved. They think Joe had a bad dream. Or just a dream, and confused it with reality. And what I always say is, it's possible because the pancakes tasted so bad, maybe he made them in his sleep. But we had some physical pancakes there, and so they actually took one of these, spending taxpayers' money, and to investigate them, to find out what's in this cosmic pancake. Well, in the meantime, a local judge there who has some interest in UFOs knows Joe. Everybody thinks Joe is not lying. They think he had a real experience. And in fact, I talked to Chad Lewis. Chad Lewis has gotten word from some people that Joe had other experiences, but he just kept his mouth shut afterwards because he had so much ridicule. Okay, so they take the pancake away. The judge is interviewing him, and he says, a little tongue-in-cheek, he says, Joe, what do these guys look like? Little green men? And Joe says, no, they were kind of like swarthy Italians. So, I don't know, a secret space program in Italy. And I can continue with this thread. Do we still have a few minutes here?
Yeah.
Okay. Because this is fascinating, because Keel in Operation Trojan Horse talks about this incident, and he talks about how, now this is back in the old days. This is back before the Greys took over and just messed up everything. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we used to have the coolest aliens, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I mean, we had the Flatwoods Monster. We had the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins, the Cisco Grove, on and on. So, but this is before. There you go.
My new co-host, the Hopkinsville Goblin.
Doesn't say much though. Oh, okay.
I can't do voices. I'll practice. I'll work on it.
So, but Keel reported on there were a lot of landings where fairly normal looking men would get out, but they were kind of fit the Men in Black mold a little bit. They were the people that saw them would say, and not terribly well, but they would say things like, "Well, they look kind of foreign. They were dark foreign types, you know." And also he quotes General Spatz was one of the big generals of World War II. In 1948, he had some kind of a press conference where in part of it he actually said, "There's no truth to the rumor that Spaniards are driving flying saucers or that they're coming from Spain." So what? So are the Italians? The Spanish guys are, no, you know. So, but the thing is that this kind of, and even our old friend Indrid Cold kind of fit this mold. So again, you have this other strange kind of thread here of these possible entities. And anyway, the upshot of the pancake being examined by the Air Force, I have to segue to Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée in Passport to Magonia quotes the Fairy Faith of Celtic Countries by Evans Wentz many times. And Evans Wentz was a theosophist. In about 1911, he wrote this book. He had been wandering through Ireland, interviewing people about their experiences with the fairies. And these are like one-on-one experiences, like we talk to people about their Bigfoot or UFO encounter. And he was told, Wentz was told by an Irishman, he said, "The fairies drink pure water, they eat fresh meat, and they never take salt." Now, this may mean nothing, but the pancakes, the cosmic pancakes from outer space, were very terrestrial in makeup, except there was no sodium. So it's a great story, and I really wonder if old Joe had other experiences afterwards.
It sounds like ultra terrestrial is like on vacation. I drove through an RV park yesterday, and those people had their vehicle and were outside barbecuing, just like those guys were. And I do wonder if that's correct about him having experiences later on, because he ate some of the pancakes, you know, and there's a lot of tradition around like don't eat anything the Fae give you, whether you're in our world or theirs.
Well, you know, you can see Joe. There's YouTube videos of his interviews with him, and one of the reporters asked him. He said, "If they came back, would you go for a ride with them?" And he actually said, "No, the food is terrible." I mean, it's worse than getting peanuts and you know, some water on a plane.
Yeah, you can't get me to go anywhere if you don't promise me food. Even yesterday, I went there because I was given really good restaurant suggestions. So that's how I ended up in a swamp yesterday morning getting attacked by deer flies. Vincent already had he had a real life Fae trap. He was playing disc golf one day, and I believe it was Krispy Kreme donuts. There was a box of them.
Yeah.
On a bench. That was the everyone thinks that a Fae trap is like a ring of mushrooms. It is definitely Krispy Kreme donuts sitting on a bench, though. You should have tasted them and seen if they had salt in them or not. Then we'd really know. But thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
You have an episode of High Strangeness Factor coming out soon.
Yes.
That I know about because I co-hosted it with you. You want to tell everyone where they can listen to that, what it's about?
Well, the High Strangeness Factor, Andy Mercer and I have been doing this for just over 5 years now. And it's on the Paranormal UK radio network. And we've talked to even Susie has been on as a guest and as a guest co-host several times. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've been able to talk to all kinds of people, and Andy gets credit for the actual producing of the show. If it wasn't for Andy, I'd just be talking to myself. So
that might be kind of entertaining, though.
Yeah, I do that a lot. You know, when I'm driving, I have great conversations.
We'll just put a moth cam in your car and live stream that. That would be great.
That would be, it could be, unless I get cut off in traffic.
We would learn some new words, I'm sure. It would still be entertaining, but not for kids.
And you notice for the show, I got a haircut. Did you check that out?
I did notice. I was suspecting it would be so Mac would leave you alone a little bit.
No. The cycle of torment just keeps going. Club is going to say something about Club is one of the guys on Mac Maloney's show that will accuse me of switching wigs or toupees to make it look like I have real hair.
Yep. And you could also hear Steve on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files. That comes out on Fridays.
I'm not sure, because we record it on Tuesdays, and I never listen to myself, so I don't know but there's a whole backlog of shows, and you'll find Susie Bastille and Andy Mercer on there about once a month lately, I think. So that's always a lot of fun.
Yep, Andy will chime in on very intellectual things. I am just there to make fun of Mac and give him a hard time.
Good deal.
All right, Steve, thank you very much for joining me. Thanks, everyone who was in the comments.
And thank you. This has been a blast.
You're very welcome. Have a good day, everyone.